So, welcome everyone to the second day of Leeds Finance Summit 2021. My name is Yusung Kai. I'm the president of Leeds Finance Summit this year. The Leeds Finance Summit is an annual conference bringing together industry professionals in an educational platform. This event is being organized entirely by students at the University of Leeds, and it is a joint venture of the Women in Leadership Society, Cryptocurrency and Blockchain Society, and Trading and Investment Society. We would like to thank all societies who helped us with promotion of our event. Leeds FinSci Society, which is a student-led financial newsletter and publication, will bring coverage of our event over the next few weeks, so make sure you subscribe. The theme of the summit this year is Post-COVID World, and we will cover investment opportunities, taxation, capital market, future of work, private equity, and venture capital in 7 speeches led by top speakers in the industry over the next 3 weeks. So today is the second session of Leeds Finance Summit, and I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Gidney. Andrew Gidney is the COO for Business Operations and Technology at BlackRock. We'll talk about how the corporate workplace could change post-COVID today. Thank you for joining us. The speech will last about 25 minutes with an additional 15 minutes of Q&A session. Now I share my screen and Andrew Gidney can start his presentation.
Great. Can you hear me and see me? Just confirm for me that you can. Yes, we're good to go. All right. Look, thank you very much for having me. It is a pleasure, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm a graduate of Leeds University, don't even want to age myself too much, but 1996 is when I graduated in a degree in economics. And I spent a year at Boddington Hall, if that still exists as a residence, and then 2 years in Headingley during my time in Leeds. So thank you for having me. What I'm going to do, if this is okay, is just spend a few minutes describing how I got to what I'm doing, what I do today, but really focus the time sharing what I hope could be useful insights I'm seeing from a professional and personal perspective around workforce composition and workplace composition as we look forward in a post-COVID world, which, by the way, it's crazy that we're even here talking about. I wonder what it'll be like after a pandemic is over. So look, with that in mind, just a little bit of history on myself. Born in Africa, lived in England, and have been in the US for 20 years. I tell you that so you can try to make sense of what I think many people regard as a mixed up accent that I have. I now live in San Francisco, well, just north of San Francisco, in a small town called San Anselmo that's famous for two reasons. One, George Lucas lives in this town, the man of Star Wars fame. Now he lives in clearly a very different house to the house I live in, but he lives in this town. And the second is this town is famous as the home of mountain biking. So for anybody who bikes, this is where it all started in the 70s. And there's a film on Amazon Prime called Clunkers with a K that I'd encourage you to watch. It's low budget, but it'll explain to you how the idea of mountain biking came to be and its birthplace here. So I'm at BlackRock today, the largest asset manager in the world. I left England in '99. I moved to Silicon Valley to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers in their audit and transaction team in the first dot-com bubble. Yes, there was a first bubble, predated the second bubble. But in '99 and 2000, many technology firms were looking to go public, and the advisory firms needed teams of people to support them. I'd visited here before, so I decided, having enjoyed the warm weather of Africa growing up, I needed some more warm weather and left to come to the West Coast. And in 2002, a colleague of mine said, why don't you come and work for Barclays? And I said, I thought that's a retail high street bank. And he said, it is, but it also has an asset management arm, a fiduciary arm that manages money on behalf of clients with the end goal of delivering a better outcome, financial wellness for every man and woman on the street in terms of their pension outcomes. So I joined Barclays in 2002. I've had a variety of roles since joining the firm. And in 2009, BlackRock, a New York-based asset management company, acquired the subsidiary of Barclays. We joined BlackRock, and I've been with BlackRock ever since. And just before I leave the point on California, if you've never been here, come and visit. It's an incredible place to see and experience. So before I get into a little bit of how the pandemic has treated us at BlackRock and how that now leads me to some comments on the post-COVID world, I'll just mention that it's ironic that the head of our European business in BlackRock, Rachel Lord, is also an alumni of Leeds University. I think she spent a few sessions with various groups at Leeds University. So it's good to know there's a fellow alumni in BlackRock from Leeds. So look, as the pandemic hit, which, by the way, certainly in the US, I remember it being a Friday the 13th of March event. And we know that Friday the 13th is not necessarily auspicious. We had to, as an organization, immediately mobilize 16,500 people to work from home, whilst seamlessly managing what is now close to $9 trillion of client assets. You can imagine how horrifying that sounds and how hard that was to mobilize as quickly as possible and make sure that client assets and their outcomes were protected. You know, fast forward 10, 11 months, whilst we're in 2021, it feels like the 500th day of 2020. And I'm sure you all feel that in your personal lives, whatever you've been doing for the last 10 to 11 months. But what I've reflected on, certainly as we talk about this through BlackRock in preparing for this conversation, is frankly not what I see as an evolution of the workplace composition and the workforce composition, but frankly, a revolution. of that. So what I want to do is I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works, and you'll let me know if it doesn't. So just give me a second here. Can you see that? I hope so.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, great. So look, I've placed 7 statements on here that weave through a myriad of topics, many of which are probably going to seem obvious. And why the hell is Andrew talking to us about these? But I want to share my perspective on these topics. And again, remember, I started working in 1996. It's now 2021, and there's some revolutionary things that are happening. So let me just talk about a few of these things. Once I get through that, I'd love to open this up to a conversation with each of you and any questions. So the days of 9 to 5 office hours are gone. When I started work, you know, I wasn't punching in and clocking out, but I was going to the office every day. And let me tell you, the general ethos, certainly in the companies I worked in, was you get there before the people above you and you kind of leave after the people above you. And so that was an ethos I walked into. And for decades, that's been a tradition. It happens because it has to in manufacturing businesses, but certainly in the finance business, in the corporate culture, that was the culture. You sort of had to be present to prove that you were engaged, be present to be able to be engaged, because that was really the only way to get work done. And clearly we didn't have the technology we have today to create connectivity in any different way. The last 10 months, certainly in the financial industry, and granted, in the last 5 to 10 years, increasingly we've seen 9 to 5 office hours concepts disappear. Certainly where I live in San Francisco, the technology firms in abundance do this. You know, around our office in San Francisco is a major headquarters for Facebook, for Salesforce, for Twitter, for Square, for LinkedIn. So they as technology firms have been leading the way in terms of thinking about outcomes of work, not how you're organized to do work. And what's happened in the last 10 to 11 months is many other industries have proven that they can do it too in a way that's different to the tradition of the 9 to 5 office hours. So that obligation of being present physically is now an obligation of delivering outcomes. And that is a very meaningful shift in how we think about the workplace composition and culture. Blurred lines, right? Our lives have been blurred continuously for the last 10, 11 months. I joke with some of the people I work with that when I take a couple of days off, which I've done recently over the Christmas holidays, I actually packed away all this work from home screens and terminals, because what I was finding was if I wanted a break, I'd walk into a room in my house and I'd see the work stuff and I'd end up working. And I think what's notable as we look forward is expectations of output seem to have increased a little bit. People have sort of stepped into a tendency of being available at all time, tethered. But I think if we as society can remove the blurriness between those lines and ensure that whilst people have flexibility in the way they go about doing their job, they can get the best out of a more flexible environment that doesn't feel like you're at home, but always reachable, always tethered and working. And that is a shift in the mindset that we have to have as organizations and as corporations to make sure that when we think about talent acquisition, retention, and promotion, we're able to provide an environment that is the best environment for people coming into the workforce or those in the workforce today. What people want today in the corporate world, in jobs, is different to when I started work. When I started work, I wasn't thinking about prominently the social good of the organization that I was looking to join. Sure, I thought about, should I work in nonprofit? Should I work doing something I really love? Should I work in something that has a better outcome for me and my family? But I didn't think about the purpose of the organization as intently as people do today. I was worried about buying a house. I knew I needed to buy a car. Well, today many people are renting. Many people don't have cars, you know, and so the sort of objectives and purpose that people are thinking about now is very different. And I think the more recent generations in the world at large are well aware, so much more aware than I was, and frankly still am, in terms of what, from a society perspective, we need to focus on. And at BlackRock, we've pivoted over the last few years to really make sure that we are a leading voice, both in our own purpose, but also the purpose of every company that we invest in on behalf of our clients, to make sure that as a collective, as an enormous force, we're looking at the good, the appropriate purpose, the well-being of society at large when we think about those companies that we will invest in on behalf of clients. You know, McDonald's advertising the healthy salad option, I would never have imagined back in 1996. And so you're seeing many organizations and many corporations pivot and respond to what I think each and every individual in the world is starting to wake up to. Larry Fink, our CEO's letter recently, if you've read it, you'll find it very interesting, where he's challenging the companies' CEOs that we invest in to be to focus on net zero, net neutral carbon outcomes, is a very indicative, very clear example of how that sort of vocal change is happening. Diversity is necessary, not just desirable. Now, there has been in the last year, unfortunately, but also necessary, a lot of press and coverage on racial discrimination globally, inequity across the world writ large. And, you know, it's easy to focus the conversation on that because it's very, very tangible. And I'll tell you now, in the US, it wasn't truly understood how deep that discrimination existed or that divide persisted up until last year and the Black Lives Matter movement. From a corporate perspective, though, diversity is broader than the demographics of individual. It's everything to do with an individual that they bring into a job, the way they think, where they're from, the color of their skin, the gender, their sexual orientation. All of those things are the makeup of an individual. It's important that we get a breadth of different individuals into our workplace to make it the best possible place to work, leading to the best possible outcomes. So this notion that it's desirable to have diversity, in my mind, is a necessity for those organizations that want to deliver on their purpose and have high performing outcomes. And it's something we hold dear in terms of the way we think of candidates we recruit, the candidates we offer jobs to, and the retention of talent across the organization. It's a social commitment. It's not just a corporate commitment, but it's a social commitment. I think increasingly all of us are signing up to, and it's a necessity. Now, skills are also going to be different in the future. You know, I'm the COO for a operating platform that services $9 trillion of assets. And traditionally, we've hired people in that space as operational folks, people who know how to run high volumes of transactions across a platform. Those skills will remain essential, but may be diminished in terms of their relative importance. Think about it now. We have in the corporate workplace, especially in the financial sector, much greater dependency on the use of data, the use of emerging technology capabilities, whether you want to call it artificial intelligence. Those skills needed to be able to understand how data can be used as a differentiator, and the deployment of data, coupled with the technologies that we now have available to us, is a skill set we hadn't thought about in the past as much as we should have. Similarly, think about a more remote workplace, a more mixed in-office and out-of-office environment, which I'm sure is inevitably what we're going to see. And in the workplace, more separation potentially as the effects of pandemic divide and making sure that that's suppressed continue. Different skills are needed. Are people able to lead as remote managers as well as they were as managers in person? It's a very, very different skill set. How you can extract the emotion of an individual through a video call, through this format, as opposed to having a coffee, meeting in person, very, very different. So we are very much pivoting to how we think we can arm our people in the organization to be good people leaders, leaders of people, not leaders of activities as much. And so I think that is going to be a pressing, urgent need for organizations and corporations. And look, we're now in a different world of unwritten rules of engaging remotely. I think I heard someone say the other day that the most spoken phrase of 2020 was "you're on mute." Now, look, I never thought we'd be in this environment ever. I thought we'd head slowly to a remote working environment, but there are societal rules of engagement now that are very different. You know, I spoke yesterday to my team in BlackRock, and we talked about the fatigue of being on video calls and the demands that places on you, both physically on your eyes and fatigue that comes with that, but also the need to be continuously visible and engaged. And, you know, my view on that is we got to challenge that. It's not that all of a sudden we're all at home and yes, you can have a video that you need to be on video calls. Think about ways to have fewer meetings to get the same outcomes. It's okay to be on audio, not on video. These are like real topics we're talking about as an organization to make sure we pivot, adapt, and change to these new rules of engagement and socialization. And you know, that is tremendously important. And I'll just go back to just the previous point I was making around necessary skills, just to reinforce that point. One thing I forgot to mention that I have in my notes here. As an organization 5 or 10 years ago, when we were promoting people or giving them new opportunities, we focused primarily on what people have done, the outcomes. In the last 5 to 10 years, we've focused on assessing them on 2 dimensions more equally: what and how. Like, was the outcome good, and did they do it well? Did they do it with friends along the way without pissing anybody off along the way? And more recently, we've added a 3rd dimension through which we measure people for the next step, which is their contribution to being a leader. Away from their day job, are they enhancing the culture? Are they driving innovation? Are they bringing groups of people along in a way that's different from their day job? So just weaving that together, you can see how we've transformed the way we assess and think about our talent. Layer onto it this new way of working, this new sort of mixed model, this social contract, different needs of individuals around purpose and well-being, the topics I've covered earlier. You end at my last point, which is it's absolutely essential that corporations like ours and many others in financial services, as well as many other industries, adapt. Now, that's not a new concept. Like, businesses have always had to adapt. Netflix was in direct competition with Blockbuster, the old video chain. And I remember when Netflix started, they were trying to get into the business of mailing a DVD for you to watch. I remember their stock was in the toilet getting hammered. And I remember vividly their pivot, their adaptation to online. Now look at how that organization has transformed whilst Blockbuster, the leading high street video store, went into bankruptcy and disappeared. That's one obvious example of now what I think to support and respond to this revolution, not evolution of the workplace workforce composition. Do we have to really make sure we're laser focused on adapting at any point where the opportunity exists, frankly, to respond and deliver against what is a very different social contract that both employees want with their organizations and society more broadly wants with the world, and deliver against it. So I'm just going to stop, if I can, stop sharing my screen now, and just come back to the video. And I think I'm going to pause there. That was That was 24 minutes, I think. Hopefully I hit that time allotment. And I'll pause there, and I'd love to open it up to any questions any of you have, any thoughts on what I said, any disagreement or refute of what I said. Totally open to it. I'd love to hear feedback. And hopefully you can still hear me, and if there are any questions, or let me know.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for your time today. It's great hearing from you. I was just have a question, moving into this, new workspace and this crazy environment. What advice do you have for, people that are actually graduating this year, in this struggling time? You mentioned when you moved to Silicon Valley, you kind of fell into the dot-com bubble. So, from that experience as well, what advice would you have for graduates?
Yeah, great question. I don't, I'm going to start negatively. I don't envy graduates at this time. I think it's a very hard time to be graduating and looking for work, primarily because, the sort of interview and onboarding process is virtual. Now, we're hiring, we're going to probably hire more than we've ever hired this year. Ironically, we've thrived in 2020 as an organization. But my advice would be twofold. One, think about the ways that you can make an impact with potential employers through a virtual meeting place. Spend a lot more time thinking about what an audio introductory call for an interview needs to feel like, and then a video call with a prospective employer needs to be. You're going to have to find ways to deliver what sort of your personality is, and what skills and capabilities you can bring through the screen, and that's a hard thing to do. But my advice so in the sort of job looking for a job perspective, I've always said this, whether you're virtual or not, you have to come to potential employers with specificity that helps them understand why they should hire you. Generalities don't work. You need substance over form. So if I was interviewing anybody from this cohort and I wanted to know if I really felt they should join our firm, I'd be looking for the 1 or 2 or 3 things that they have done, or that they're focused on, or that they can bring to the table that are tangible. At our firm, we have a really strong meritocracy across the organization. We've put many people into roles that on paper they shouldn't be doing, but they got there because they can demonstrate execution. And so, an interview is about delivering your personality to people, but also being specific about where you think you can add sort of step change value to that organization. Second thing I'd say is, on the very positive side, the world's so much smaller now than it ever was. And yes, we can't travel and we can't, but it truly is. It took like a Herculean effort for me to move to Silicon Valley. It was logistically a nightmare. It was hard to get hold of people on the phone, blah, blah, blah. I tell you, and I, having lived abroad in Africa, England, and the US, there's no better experience in life than going to do something in a different country for a period of time, for however long. So I would widen the sort of lens you have on what you want to do and where you want to work, and not get too downhearted if that doesn't immediately fall into place on September 1 after your graduation. I remember being panic stricken. I think it was more my dad, like sort of turning the screws a little bit. Have you got a job? Have you got a job? Have you, and I was delighted to get an accountancy role with with Price Waterhouse at the time. But I look back and I had many friends who didn't rush to jobs. They, for different reasons, some took a year off, some took their time, who frankly have gone on to have phenomenal careers. And so have a bit of patience, think about how to do this differently, and don't narrow your purview in terms of what you look for. travel and worldly experience, there is no substitute for, in my opinion. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very valuable advice. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Andrew, there's a lot of questions in the chat box, so you can check it out.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let me just see. Okay. Should I just go through a few of those? Does that make sense? Okay. So I love this question. I think this was from Ben, who may have just asked the other company. What do you think of the implications are of increased home working for cities? Oh my gosh. So this is a very like a real close to home question. New York's a ghost town, right? And BlackRock, interestingly, is about to move into its new headquarters in 2022 on the west side of Manhattan. We've seen a flood of people work from outside the city who either lived in the city or lived close to the city. And I'm not sure what's going to happen over time. I think cities may not ever be what they were. I think they'll get close to being what they were, but they'll never be what they were. I think also in this 10 to 12 month period, I think a lot of people have reassessed what they want from where they want to live. They may have had a taste of the outdoors that they weren't getting previously. They may have realized that a small apartment in Manhattan just ain't all that it's cracked up to be. And so not only I think a personal preference is moving, but you're also seeing large companies make some different decisions. And I know on the West Coast here, we've seen companies make decisions to cancel leases. Pinterest, which is a social media company, they, just to give you a sense, they had a contract on a new site near the basketball stadium in San Francisco, this cool area south of Market Street, it's called. And they just paid a $90 million penalty to break the lease because they will not be going into a large office. They'll have a couple of offices here and there, but they'll have a very distributed workforce. And so I think cities are going to become less prominent, and you're going to have distributed workforces all over the place. Let me pick another question. Okay. If you manage to secure a job in a financial company like BlackRock, how easy is it to move up the career ladder? Look, I started in Price Waterhouse, which became Price PwC as it is today. And I was like a level 1A. I forget what it was. And as soon as I went in there, I loved joining PwC. And I immediately thought, oh gosh, this is a giant organization. And it sounds like it takes me 7.2 years to get to 2A, 11.1 years to get to, it felt very structured and hierarchical immediately. But what I learned when I went in there was, no, this company is quite progressive. Despite you have to have levels, there were opportunities where meritocracy played out, where you could advance your career much more. It's hard to do though. And bigger companies, it's generally harder than smaller companies. But my advice on moving up the career ladder is not to spend your time with senior leaders and trying to constantly market yourself. It's to demonstrate capability through execution and outcomes, and be willing to speak your mind, be willing to take a bet, be willing to do something different. I was just talking to a lady at BlackRock this morning who joined BlackRock 10 years ago as in one of our businesses. That business we wanted to sell a few years later. She asked to be part of the leadership team to sell it. Then we set up a new office in Hungary, in Budapest, and she's based in London. She put her hand up to move to Hungary against the wishes of her family, but she knew she wanted to do it because it'd be interesting, and she saw it as an opportunity to move up the ladder. She's now running our client service operations organization, which is enormous, and she's one of the best leaders we have. But that was a blend of capability. She demonstrated she could do something and taking a risk or two along the way. So don't be afraid to reassess where you are every 2 years once you get going in your career. I still do it today. What is that, 25 years later? I revisit every 2 years, whether I'm having fun, whether I want to do something different, and should I do something totally out of my comfort zone. 4 years ago, I thought to myself, should I ever try selling something? I've never been in sales. And then I realized I'm not sure I was cut out for that. But the point is, I went through the thought process just to make sure I knew what I wanted and what I was doing was still something that really appealed to me. I'm just going to pick on a couple of other questions. I love this question here from Radi Rawas, I think it is. Sorry if I haven't pronounced your name properly. How can finance business grads adapt to the current transition to use more automatic techs in the financial industry? Right, so we at BlackRock, and I think this is true of many financial firms, we're trying to democratize technology. We're trying to raise the technology quotient in every single person, including me, right? Including me. When I took a role about 8 years ago in running one of the operational teams, I had to learn the system we use, which we call Aladdin, inside and out. And it was daunting. I'd never really spent time deep in an application. My roles had always been about process and talking to people and not interacting with technology. My advice is, yes, you're in finance, in the finance domain. Take every opportunity you can to raise your own tech quotient. And it doesn't have to be in all the relevant tech that exists. It doesn't have to be that you are immediately a Python coder or you understand how to use new emerging connected technologies like Uncork or Splunk. But pick and choose now. Have curiosity, get your head around it, get your teeth into it. Because I am telling you, once you get over this, and I'm not sure many of you will have this fear, but many of us who came from a previous generation had this fear of the technology. Once you get over that, my God, it's pretty simple today. These technologies are so user-friendly. And if you can bring finance coupled with techniques around data technology into a workplace, to us, when we're hiring people, those are two terrific complementary skills. I'll keep going until I'm told not to, if that works for everybody. Okay, I love this question here from Selby. I agree with you on what you said about 9 to 5 working days. I can see people moving away from it. What does BlackRock do to ensure good work-life balance while they're working from home? It's a great question. So we've struggled with it. Let me give you an example. We going into the Thanksgiving holiday, which, if you don't know, is a holiday at the end of November. It falls on a Thursday. So typically, people take off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We decided, because of our concern around people being burnt out, to monitor how many people logged in Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and compared that to Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of 2019 over Thanksgiving. And we found a 30% increase in 2020 compared with 2019 for those logging in. And it wasn't because all of a sudden we became this demanding organization. It was because people couldn't separate that blurriness that I talked about earlier. It's really, really hard. And I think 2020 also saw a great deal of insecurity, people feeling if they didn't go that extra mile, their jobs might be at risk. The market was in turmoil. The economic outlook was horrendous. So what are we doing? Like a few things we've tried to do. We now have a unlimited holiday policy, which is mind-blowing. It's no longer you get 4 weeks holiday and maybe 6 weeks if you grow up through the organization and become more senior. We now say you can take the holiday you want, but you work with your manager to figure that out. Our general expectation is it will be between 3 and 8 weeks a year, but it's flexible time off. We call it FTO. And we encourage that as much as we can. Other things we've done around that are we encourage our senior leaders, when they take it off, this is going to sound very silly, to put an out of office on their email, to say, I'm out on FTO, please contact Johnny or Jane or whomever it may be. We've also recently, to respect the fact of this blend between work and life, told everybody no meetings will happen on Friday afternoons in your local time zones. So realistically, on the West Coast, 8 hours behind, I can't really have a meeting with anyone in the UK. And it forces you to be more disciplined and forces some separation. And then I think it's up to leaders. You know, I get up very early, but it's because I have a day that covers time zones that are ahead of me. But 3, the afternoon West Coast time, I'll take off and I'll tell my team I'm out. Now that's going to sound like I'm slacking because I'm leaving at 3 o'clock, but sure, I was up at 5 and working, but I don't shy away from it. I promote it. I tell people, oh, I'm off to go and ride my bike, or I'm off to go and hang out with my kids. And so that is a really important behavioral trait we're trying to impress upon people. And the final thing is, I think more and more companies are going to provide services around mental health, provide an environment where you can talk about those things that are creating constraints or strains in your personal life. Lord knows, I think we're going to see mental health issues for years to come, given what's just happened. And so we're trying to make sure that there's an environment where you can talk about it. It's not a problem to talk about it. We welcome it, and we try to provide resources to people that that where they need it, we can give them as much personal support as possible. To give you a very personal example, at BlackRock, we have a benefit for every employee who can get tested in the US for COVID once a week. You get a pack sent to your house through FedEx, you do your own swab, you fill it, put it, and you send it in and they give you the results. Well, I had COVID over Christmas. I don't know where I got it from, no idea. I got the result on Christmas Day, believe it or not. So you can imagine the delight that. And frankly, I had some symptoms, but it was manageable. And more thankfully, my kids were okay. But as soon as that test result came in, BlackRock called me. Like, someone from BlackRock called me and said, "Are you okay? Is there anything you need? We're going to check in with you in a day or two." And that to me was enormous. You know, that I love BlackRock. I've worked here for a long time. I could go on about all the many things, but that simple measure, that someone called me because we have an infrastructure that ensures we're focused on health and well-being, and I think you're going to see more and more companies offer a rounded experience for employees through the benefits lens than ever before. Should we go for one more question, given the time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, another one question.
Okay. Let me just find one here. Okay, final question from Dan Wardle. I hope I've said that right, Dan. In a time of online working, how do you see companies adapting their culture for the long-term online? So, big topic at our company. Our company was built by 5 founders, 3 of which are still running the firm. And they used to meet around one of their kitchen tables to chat about where BlackRock in the late 80s and early 90s would go. And that strength of round the table in person has continued to persist in this organization. And I believe it's part of the secret sauce of BlackRock. And I think many companies would probably tell you the same thing. Zuckerberg in his dorm room, Facebook, go back to Hewlett and Packard. Years ago, HP building printers in the garage in Palo Alto, just south of San Francisco. Like, being together is culturally rich and very beneficial for innovation. So we are having a long debate at the moment about, we don't want to erode or compromise the things that have made our culture special and enabled innovation, but recognize how the needs and preferences of individuals have changed, particularly post the last 10, 11 months. And I don't know where that's going to play out. My personal opinion is, if we can find a very flexible environment, which results in people still being together for the majority of the time, but certainly not 90% of the time, and it creates an environment where people want to come and be together because they see value in seeing their colleagues and the innovation that can come from that, and they can adapt the way they spend their work week. I actually think we can make the culture and the innovation outcomes even stronger. But it's a very fine balance, and something that I know, we are, but I know many companies are wrestling with at the moment. So look, let me stop there, if that's and hopefully that was a helpful. Yeah, Dan, I see your response. Thank you. Hopefully that was a helpful answer, and hopefully what I've shared today gives you a little bit of a blend of what's happening the company I work at, but also some personal perspectives from me.
Thank you very much for Andrew to share your insightful speech for us. This was a pleasure. So I'll start sharing my screen.
All right.
Yeah. So
Great.
next week we do have another 3 sessions, including venture capital, private equity, and long-term trends in capital markets. So if you can take some time to register via this QR code, then I can send you the email notifications prior to the event. So thank you for everyone who attend this event, and thank you for Andrew Guinea again.
My pleasure. Nice to see you guys, and good luck with the rest of your sessions.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.